Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to FlipTech 2020. This is Matthew Moore, and I am here for Ed at Your Best. And I am actually sitting here with Ainsley Fay and Angela Barnett. And they just got done talking about Pear Deck and Zoom in the elementary school classroom because we're trying to meet the needs of students in ways that we have never tried to meet them before, or if we have, not on the type of scale that we're having to face it today. So Angela, give me a little intro about yourself.
So I'm Angela Barnett. I'm a third grade teacher from Southern California. I work at a Title I school and have been an ELA ELD site lead for several years.
All right. And Ainsley?
I'm Ainsley Fay Merkel. I am a third grade teacher in Pennsylvania and mom of two boys. I'm also an edu-blogger for crazyteacherlife.com, and I am a hashtag third chat moderator with Angela.
And while we're here, that is also Wednesday nights at what time Pacific?
6 o'clock Pacific time.
6 o'clock Pacific. Everybody else can do their math, and that's their enrichment project. Figure out what time that is wherever they live. And here's the thing. You guys have been participating in FlipTech 2020, and we so much appreciate that. But we've also have a number of questions, particularly for elementary, because we got so many questions from so many participants about how does some of this stuff work for elementary and some of the challenges the elementary teachers have to address in this remote learning, whatever we call this environment. So I have a couple questions for you. What's the one or two things that elementary school teachers that are kind of in that traditional, kind of in the whatever, they've been dumped in remote learning land, what are the one or two things that they have to know to survive and or that they want to know to survive?
Okay, I'll start. So one of the first things, I have a friend who teaches online. She's an online teacher. And so I've had a lot of these conversations with her, and we actually created a few presentations, but one of them is management and scheduling, like organization, or let's say management of organization and scheduling. So right now, Slides Mania, the woman who does slide and what we used for our presentation, she has created so many digital planners that teachers can use, students can use. And I think that is key you have, like, especially for elementary, like we teach all subjects.
Right.
So when I teach ELA, it's usually a week-long lesson. Science now is going to be 1 to 2 months of a unit. So in my head, I have to wrap around what is that scheduling or planning going to look like, and what's going to work. Because so where I was stuck when we went to this emergency teaching was the whole management piece for me, not even my students, because I had to take care of me before it could roll out to them. So that scheduling piece, I started creating these weekly planner schedules that I pushed out to my students of all subjects. And I used the Slides Mania template. And I even started getting positive feedback from my parents. Like, oh my God, thank you for doing this. It took me a month to get there, but even I was getting positive feedback from the parents because so now not only was it working for me, but that was, it was being applied to like my students and the families. So that management of organizing and scheduling, getting that down first and having a clear, and like you said, like we're talking about mindset, you got to have that mindset of get up and go. What can you use in the classroom and online at the same time that's going to work? So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with that management piece of organizing and scheduling.
I would say keeping it simple too.
Okay.
The more complicated you make it, the more difficult it is for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I would, if teachers have that opportunity to kind of get to know their kids, which I know can be difficult if you start off digitally. If you start off in person, it might be easier to figure out. But the one thing that I will say is knowing what works for your families and kids, because Angela's kids did really well with a week-long template. My kids were overwhelmed by a week-long template, so I could only assign tasks day to day, because if they saw the whole week, my particular group of students panicked and thought and even if I told them this is not all due today, they would panic and think it's all due today, and they would shut down and I get nothing from them.
Right, because
so that's where you have to know them.
They were, from their perspective, it was, I don't care when it's due. I was given all of this assigned today, versus maybe that more developed student goes, fine, it's all assigned today, but it's not due until, and can break it down into pieces.
I would suggest to your elementary kids, your elementary teachers, to maybe put out a survey to families, right? And find out, okay, how does what overwhelms your child? Not knowing what's coming next, or having too much to do in one day? And that's kind of the better question to kind of ask what happens, because that'll determine what the teacher then chooses to do. You obviously want your whole week planned and everything's ready to go, but how you go about it might be different. You might choose to if they're going to use Google Classroom, you might have everything pre-scheduled into Google Classroom, but when you schedule it, only one math, one ELA, one science, one social studies shows up on today's assignments, and it's labeled Monday, blah, 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 date 2020.
Yeah, look at the link that I provided. So this is what I actually use with my students. So it's week long, but I covered up the days. So like on Monday, you would only see what's available on Monday. And I had Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday covered. And I literally wrote coming soon. And so next on Tuesday, then I would reveal what was Tuesday, because it gave.
So like a advent calendar.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You could just do it in Google Classroom like I did. I mean, there's so many different ways.
Yeah.
The other thing too is I also emailed my families a weekly schedule, because those families aren't going to be, so there are some families who just are flat out honest and say, listen, I'm not going to be able to help my kid on Monday, but I can help them all I want on Tuesdays. That's how my work schedule works. Okay, great. Then I would kind of email a schedule in advance to the families and say, these are the types of things. Here are some hot button places where your kid might need a little extra support. And the parents knew in advance kind of what was happening. But the kids didn't necessarily know, because that was my group of kids. They couldn't handle knowing all of that. And then as we got more comfortable, then I maybe started to do projects that did last a couple of days. But I when I say start small.
Baby
the less
steps.
clicking they do, the kids, the better you're gonna get kids to do things. So like, you can embed all you want in slides, but let me tell you, if there's too much clicking going on and too many different places they have to go from that slide, you're never going to get the assignment back to you, which can make that digital learning difficult. So if they're trying to go as quickly from in classroom to digital at home or vice versa, they're going to want to keep it very simple. And the templates they use should be the same templates every single day, every single week.
Well,
it should never be too different.
That's the other thing that I'm just really harping on. There's basically two things I'm harping on. Number one is this whole deal is a spectrum, and the same tools are going to work up and down the spectrum to different levels. You need to pick a spot and be able to turn it up, or you need to be able to turn it down based on where we are with kids. So don't change what you're doing. Find something that will work if we're present. Now, it might be kind of unnecessary if we're present, but it's absolutely necessary if you're not here at all. But it's always there. It's still underneath the surface. I
think that mindset has to change for teachers too, depending on what's going to happen, because here's like, as a teacher who does many digital things in the classroom, now, of course, there is huge benefits to pencil, paper, and textbooks in front of them.
We're all, fine, moving on,
We get it. But as a person who embeds tech in their mind and what they do every day, even if they're in the classroom, you want them to have a landing board of everything that they're doing. So having that template, whether they're in the classroom or not, that the kids go to in Google Classroom or whatever format that you're using, that's going to be great. Because then if they're doing it in the classroom, they're doing it at home and vice versa. It's never going to be anything different. My kids always knew in Google Classroom, this is where your word work is every week. I never taught word work like in person. My kids always had it flipped. They always watched a video of how to do the word work and then did it on their own. You know, so from day one, I embedded just little procedures in my in-person classroom. So that way, when we did end up going digital in the spring, it was kind of like a no-brainer for them. They knew to go into Google Classroom. They knew where to find all of these things. They knew their writing assignment that had been working on right before we left. I told them it was due, and they just went back into the writing piece that they were working on, typed it up, submitted it to me, turned it in. So making sure that those types of things are already set up in person will help if they have to go digital, or vice versa. They start digital and then they go into the classroom. Well, now you have all this digital stuff to start off with. I would definitely tell a teacher who's new to this to just at least start everything digital.
Yeah.
But small.
Absolutely.
You know, like maybe you start with one assignment and then you start with 2 different types of assignments. And teach those procedures one at a time.
Yeah. I put the Bitly in there too, Matt, if you want to use it. So we presented for the Small Schools Association, and this one's on scheduling. So we kind of did, my friend Crystal, who teaches online, we kind of just joined forces. Like, she took her online perspective, I took my in-class emergency perspective, and we kind of put the 2 together. So you can share that with your teachers also, because there's a lot of links and templates in there too. That's
amazing. And now, so set up your landing pad. That's number 1. You got to have
Google
your
Classroom or Google
digital
Slides
landing pad, whatever it is that you use in your school, landing pad, and it better be ready for day 1.
Yep.
2, start small. Keep it, so start small and keep it simple, or kind of 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
A thing, get the child used to the, you called it procedure and classroom management. You know, I would call it teaching them the rituals, okay? But that's, you got to get them to know that, because if we have 2 days with them, when they leave in those 2 days, they need to know how to use the landing pad. What are you basically going to work with? Then keep it simple. I would assume keep the number of tools that you're going to use to a minimum. Folks, what is your, and help me out here, what are the big tools that we have to, let me ask this question again. What is the most important thing for English/language in the elementary? Is it the reading series?
Okay, so we want to talk, like what Ainsley was saying was, like, you know, you want to take the essentials, right? So like her word work, she's doing a screencast to teach the word work piece. Okay. So the essential part would be like maybe your reading skills, the phonics piece, depending on the grade level too, because all those standards don't
go up or down. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's what's your essential. So like for me, like for 3rd grade, if you're doing reading, it's comprehension. What are those skills for comprehension, understanding? And that it's going to look so many different ways, like whether it's graphic organizers, teaching your students how to create a graphic organizer, how to use a graphic organizer. Basics like restating the question. How do you restate the question to answer it and use text evidence? And it's that blended, like Ainsley was saying, like we've got all our text, like we use text. So now it's using the digital curriculum versus the hard copy. And how do you manipulate? It's like highlighting or taking notes.
Or do you screencast to yourself reading it and asking questions, and you embed that into something like a Pear Deck where you have, okay, you read 1 page out loud to them. The next slide is a question about it that you've now asked. then you go to another slide and they can do that asynchronously.
Am I broadly correct to say that Pear Deck is in essence an overlay for slides?
Yes, that is probably the best way to describe Pear Deck. Is it is an interactive overlay onto your slide. So you could literally do whatever you want on the slide, and you can manipulate how your slide looks based on what you want to have essentially that overlay to do for you. So to kind of go back to your question about tools, is it really that important for them to be able to go into that digital resource? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how harping on actually using the curricular resource that the district is. My district doesn't really want us using the curricular resource because they find that it's not the best tool to be using all the time. But some districts are, you're on this page on this day at this time. So it really depends on kind of what district you're working with and what their philosophy is on how to the T they have to be following that resource.
Community expectation, yeah.
Yeah, so what is that expectation? If the expectation is it's a little more loosey-goosey, then encourage those teachers to find other ways to just, embed it the way that I was explaining. If you're more Angela's district where they have to be on a certain page at a certain time, then yeah, those kids really do need to know how to go into that resource and figure out how to navigate through it. So it depends. So your tools are really going to depend on what they're doing. But I would say basic tools, doesn't matter what subject you're talking about. They need to know how to use Google Docs.
Yep.
They need to know how to use Google Slides. They need to know how to use, I would say, Pear Deck of all of them, because I think you're going to get the most bang for your buck with that tool. They need
and
to
these
know
are teachers, not students. Students need to be able to use whatever product we've created from Docs, Slides, Pear Deck, etc.
Correct. But teachers need to be able to use these things.
To create. So Docs, Slide, Pear Deck, Classroom, or whatever your LMS overlay is.
And I would just say the G Suite, Google Forms. You can teach little guys forms.
So, okay, just because nobody will believe me, how young can I teach a kid to use Google Forms?
I would say TK.
Okay.
Kindergarten. This guy right here can use them.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay. All right. So don't take any guff if the kindergarten teachers say, well, my kids can't do it. All right.
But
Don't
start small and has to be grade level appropriate, right?
And ask one question, like pick the dog. Like, it could just be something simple to teach them how to do it. It's a multiple choice question. They use a picture and you're like, find the animal that starts with the letter D, or find the number 1, and just teaching them how to do it one thing at a time. I mean, you're not going to ask them, find blah, 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 and it's going to be this long for Google Forms for a kindergartner like my kiddo.
Right.
But for kindergartners, if they have a link, they just click on it, they click their answer, they press submit. And that's where the last most important tool in my wheelhouse would be. They need to know how to use some sort of screencasting software, like Screencastify or Screen Capture or whatever the district is endorsing as a curricular tool, because they need to be able to model how to do this on their screen. They need to be able to read aloud from a screen. They need to be able to provide asynchronous, here's my face and I'm teaching you a lesson, whatever it is. But that would be the last tool that I would say a teacher has to have. If they don't know how to use a screencasting tool, everything that they try to do digital from there could be very hazardous, because you're going to have kids who, I can't figure this out. Well, I don't really know how to help you. And if you start up front by creating a quick screencast of, here's how you toggle back and forth between tabs. Here's how you click and press submit. Here's how you navigate my launch pad that I've given you. Here's a quick video. Let me show you, and then we can try it together. But that's how you avoid all the issues to begin with, is you create a video using a screencasting tool and show them how to do it before they try it.
This is what we were talking about in your first presentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't assume anything. And it doesn't matter whether it's kindergarten, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, 12th grade. Trust me.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. you can assume nothing.
No.
Okay, you have to show it step by step. Now, a kid may go, "This is dumb. I already know how to do this." Well, that's because you're so smart, young man. That's because you're awesome. What can I tell you?
And maybe you do want to do Google Form with that type of age group and say, click on all of the resources that you have used in this past year when we went virtual. What are things you have experienced with? And it's nobody's only I'm going to see these results. If you are dealing with a high schooler who's like, well, I don't want to say that I don't know how to do this. Well, I mean, I get that peer pressure, right?
Yeah.
But if it's a Google Form, they're going to be honest because, or at least hopefully they'll be honest, because nobody's going to see it but you. And you can tell them, hey, listen, I need you to be honest because I need to know where we have to start. And I feel like most kids, minus your handful, will be very honest with what tools they're comfortable with and familiar with.
Now, I'm going to share my ignorance, okay? Because I'm speaking, therefore my ignorance is leaking right out my mouth. But you have language arts, reading, etc. That's kind of a thing here. Honestly, science kind of falls under language arts most of the time, doesn't it? Because we're using those language arts in science. Okay, now so I got one yes and I got one no. How about social science? How about social sciences?
We technically have a dedicated block. So, and not everybody does. And that's, again, where you have to know what the district's recommendations are. Do they have a dedicated 45-minute block of time or do they not? Like for me, yes, I have to embed it elsewhere too, because otherwise we never get to it all. But technically speaking, I have a 45-minute block every day of science, social studies, or health. So technically speaking, I have a dedicated block of time. Now, does that really play out? Probably not, because we do social studies and science content elsewhere. But again, that would be where you have to know.
Across the board. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Why are you going to waste an opportunity for science when you're doing an English reading or a sentence creating response passage? Yes, correct. Now let's talk about the big pain in the butt. Math. What tool do we have to have for math if I'm in the K5, K6 situation?
So for third grade, we do, our major standards are multiplication, understanding multiplication, and the different strategies. And so Google Drawings. I started using Google Drawings for math so students can represent their strategies. And then I actually started, I wanted, right before COVID, screencasting. So students screencasting their Google drawing and talking about it. Because before I would use Flipgrid, before they had the integrated whiteboard, my students actually use a whiteboard and explain in Flipgrid. But Google Drawings now, if you have to teach it, it's a little bit more challenging, but it's awesome. They can show their learning on Google Drawings and they can screencast it and share that with you also.
But again, like you just presented, Pear Deck can also solve some of those problems too.
Yes.
Pear Deck if you're really looking for kind of a catch-all tool, you can ask those formative questions, multiple choice. You can have kids highlighting and annotating text. You can have kids showing you what they know. For math, I would put up the math problem. And if I was having them, we were learning how to use the cubes method of, circling the question, underlining what those types of things. That would be my first slide in Pear Deck was the question and all they could do. They weren't allowed to solve it. All they were allowed to do was underline, circle, and highlight all the information they needed. And then the next slide was the information I knew that they needed that I already highlighted, circled, and did. And if they want to go back and look at it, they could. But now on the next slide, they're actually solving it. And so that's why I fell in love with Pear Deck was simply because it's that catch-all tool. If you're trying to avoid learning how to do too many things, this is your one-stop shop to make sure you're not doing too much. And then maybe at the end of your Pear Deck, you're doing more of that summative piece. Like an exit
Let's
ticket
be honest,
or something.
in this COVID mess, summative is going to have to take a backseat to formative.
100%.
Because summative, Summative is to meet an imaginary line that we have set based on a cultural or social expectation. That imaginary line has been moved for everyone in the world. So the idea that we can still meet the same line under different circumstances goes right back to the problem that we have right here between our ears. And it's an expectation that is unrealistic.
Yeah.
That unrealistic expectation can be exceedingly damaging to students. I'll hop off my soapbox.
And so the thing becomes like, you want to find those tools that are going to give you, that best information that you possibly can, and finding tools that are going to allow you to kind of have a one-stop shop. If it's Edpuzzle, great.
Right.
If that's the tool you're comfortable with, then go for it. And there's nothing to say that you can't use whatever tool you're comfortable with. But Edpuzzle does have its limitations. If it's a Quizzes or a Kahoot, again, great tools, excellent features, but again, they also have their limitations too. Like I've used Kahoot because they have built-in slides now that you can use and then ask questions. So kind of a, formative way to go. But
and what's like for me too, like not even just summative, but data is important. Like at my school site, where each classroom is 50% English language learners, I've got about 10 to 15% of students who have an IEP. And this is out of 30 kids in an elementary classroom. So to like our school, we use IXL. So
Yes.
it is paid, but it does collect data, which is good, and it's based on the standards. So regardless of summative and formative, you are collecting data. And then Quill. I absolutely love Quill for grammar, language arts, and that collects data also. There's diagnostics for English language learners. There's a diagnostic you can give at the beginning of the year to all your students, just to see where they're at. And talk about flipped, like it's right there, especially for grammar. And I hate to say this because I love English language arts with all my heart, but it's not the essential piece that teachers need to spend their time teaching. So if you have something that's valid that students can use, I would say Quill would be it. Because you've got to think like, where do you need to spend most of your time teaching or creating those screencasts, creating those lessons. And if it's not grammar and you can just apply grammar, like in my schedule, I would just have the link to Quill and they know to spend like 15 minutes on Quill a day. So, and you can see what's awesome. You can see like when they, like it tracks them, like when they've used it, what they've done. And so you can go back to a student and go, dude, you haven't been on Quill in 5 days. Like,
Yeah.
Our district is using Freckle next year, which is another one of those tools. And actually Freckle is free. If you want most of the features, it is free.
Free too. So Quill's
yeah. So but this would be more for like math, ELA, science, and social studies. So the only caveat that I will say with it is it's going to require you as a teacher to do some teaching because it doesn't do any teaching itself. It really more is kind of, it's gathering data on currently where they're at.
Well, and I think that's something to think about, initially as we try to get going and figure this out. Mm-hmm. I think the teaching and the instruction needs to come primary. The data gathering is going to need to be a piece, but it's your secondary step. It's your phase 2. It's not going to be your phase 1 because we need to give kids a sense of continuity, normalcy, and we need to set expectations. You can't do that by collecting data. You do that by creating instruction, whether it's in person or digital. And so those pieces are important. But it's a matter of triage. What do we hit first? What as an ignorant high school teacher do I not get? What don't I get about this whole thing in elementary?
I will say integration. we as elementary teachers, because most of us teach all subject areas, like you were asking about social studies and science, regardless of your blocks, you've got to integrate. Like, and that, I think that even goes for middle school and high school, even when you're teaching social studies or math. Like in math, students need to explain. Okay, well, write out your explanation, right? Like when you're doing a presentation, you usually write out your script. Well, you need to get students to be able, because there is a correlation between speaking and writing. A lot of times if kids writing is like all over the place, then a lot of times when they're trying to explain to you.
Yeah.
So that's where you can start integrating those pieces, is especially English language arts across all subject areas, that reading and writing portion. So I know for math, I have my students, because they have to learn to explain in sentences. They have to write it out. They have to write out their steps. They have to they have to be able to explain how to solve a problem by talking to somebody. So they have to be able to say, step 1, do this. And the person has to be able to actually follow through those steps to complete that math problem.
That's wonderful. I've already taken so much of your time, ladies, and I very much apologize. But I really absolutely appreciate you sitting down with me on this, because the idea that we're going to deal this with an elementary building or a middle school building, that's ridiculous. This has to be across the board that we're addressing these issues, and having an understanding means we also have a greater appreciation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me. We very much appreciated your presentation, but more importantly, we appreciate you sticking around to spend just a little time with us, answering some questions, because it really is important for us all to understand each other, because we're all in this together. So I know that you guys do the best you can for kids, and that's all we're trying to do. Thank you, Ainsley. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Matt.
This has been Edit Your Best with FlipTech 2020 and the Flip Learning Network.